Strange Studies of Strange Stories.
Listen, Billy Pilgrim has come unstuck in time. Billy has gone to sleep a senile widower and awakened on his wedding day. He has walked through a door in 1955 and come out another one in 1941. He has gone back through that door to find himself in 1963. He has seen his birth and death many times, he says, and pays random visits to all the events in between. He says, Billy is spastic in time, has no control over where he is going next, and the trips aren't necessarily fun. He is in a constant state of stage fright, he says, because he never knows what part of his life he is going to have to act in next.
That was a paragraph from Slaughterhouse-Five, a novel by Kurt Vonnegut, a paragraph that does us a solid by summing up the book's premise as well as demanding that you listen.
And you are listening to Strange Studies of Strange Stories. I'm Chris Lackey.
And I'm Chad Pfeiffer. We'll be giving each other Slaughterhouse-Fives and puppy mill fist bumps all month long here at strangestudies.com and Patreon. This is our free show for November. If you dig it, please subscribe for more. Before we get going, I do have a confession to make.
All right.
You told me what we were covering this month,
yeah,
but I was only half listening, and I was kind of too embarrassed to say anything. But I did remember that the title had a number or something, so I read all of Fahrenheit 451, thinking that had to be it. But then I finished, and I thought there wasn't anything about World War II in there.
No.
And I know that you were talking about that when you described the book, so I did a little searching and realized it was Catch-22 you were talking about.
No.
So I read that.
No.
And then I was right on the last page when the conversation suddenly kind of came back to me. And that's not what he said. You said Cider House Rules. So I pivoted and I read that one. Listen, it was a busy morning. It wasn't until I heard that opening paragraph that I even realized we were doing Slaughterhouse-Five, which is why I kind of sounded surprised.
Oh.
Can you grab a coffee real quick while I give it a read?
Okay.
And we're back.
Wow.
That was a really good book. In all seriousness, this was my first time actually reading it a few days ago. You've been wanting to cover it on the show for a while.
Yeah, it has been a favorite of mine for years. And honestly, I think it's one of the best books ever written. That's right. I said it.
Wow.
And I mean it. But I think that there is a reason it's actually right for our show.
Right. We talked about this. And after giving the book a read, I agree. Vonnegut went through a horrible experience in the war. And the reason it's right for the show is because he uses the format of a strange story to process this experience. And we talk all the time on the show about how these genre short stories use high concept to give perspective on real experiences. And this is an incredibly creative example of that. So I think you are correct to hit it up for coverage. But speaking of incredibly creative strangeness, before we get into this work of literature, we do have to provide some monstrous Lovecraftian content in our show. It's required by law.
Yep.
And this month, it is coming at you from our sponsor, Spectre Miniatures.
That's right. From the creators of Spectre Operations comes Cosmic Horror, a new expansion inspired by the works of H.P. Lovecraft.
For folks who are unfamiliar, Spectre Operations is a miniature wargaming set of figurines and a rule set. The emphasis for the core game is on modern tactical warfare.
And Cosmic Horror is where that tactical wargaming meets the unknowable. The game takes players back to the weird world of Lovecraft's 1930s America.
I love the tagline, supernatural horror in miniature. That's so great.
Steven, Spectre Miniatures owner, rules writer, and designer, is a lifelong H.P. Lovecraft fan. He's always wanted to merge his passion with wargaming and his love of the weird fiction, and Cosmic Horror is the realization of that dream. He's poured 30 years of wargaming experience, 20 years of miniature design into creating something truly special here. Steven sent me some of the minis, and I love them. I am painting the cultist right now, and I'll post some pictures of those minis that I painted. Please don't judge too harshly.
I love the monsters, the monster miniatures.
Yeah, I'm saving those.
The non-monsters are cool too. There are New England cops, there's occult detectives, there's G-men, and both urban and rural Deep One hybrids. Whether you're staring up at the moon from a skyscraper rooftop or lying back on a soft summer meadow, Spectre Miniatures has a mini to menace you against any backdrop. And the rules guide looks really cool, too.
Yeah. You can check out the game at SpectreMiniatures.com. Spectre spelt the correct and English way. That's
Yes.
R-E instead of E-R.
Like the evil Bond organization.
Exactly.
There are big things coming for Cosmic Horror very soon, so follow them on the socials, sign up for the newsletter to keep up to date. We will link out in the show notes.
Who was that reader we heard at the top?
That was Sean Langenecker making his debut on the show. Sean is an actor and director here in Madison, and he's a fan of Vonnegut. When word got out on the street that we were covering Slaughterhouse-Five, he said, hey, sign me up. And he done got signed up. So welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sean.
As we heard at the top, this book is about a character who is hopping around in his own life. Because of that, it's going to be difficult for us to give a linear synopsis. And of course, this work is longer than the short stories we typically cover. I'm going to give an incredibly broad synopsis right now. And I think once you've heard this, we can then jump around a bit and discuss, and you'll know generally what we're talking about. Billy Pilgrim is a character who jumps between his experiences as a chaplain's assistant in World War II, where he survived the firebombing of Dresden as a prisoner of war, and his post-war life as a married, well-to-do optometrist. The novel also includes Billy's abduction by aliens called Tralfamadorians, who have a four-dimensional view of time and take him to their planet, where he is put on display in a zoo and mated with a movie star. So just your run-of-the-mill plot, but that's the gist of it.
Slaughterhouse-Five, or The Children's Crusade, A Duty Dance with Death, was published in 1969. It was Vonnegut's sixth novel.
It says on my dust jacket, Kurt Vonnegut's humor, satiric voice, and incomparable imagination first captured America's attention in The Sirens of Titan in 1959, and established him as a true artist with Cat's Cradle in 1963. So he was famous and successful by the point this book came out. Mm-hmm. A fact that he comments on in the book. The dust jacket here also says that this is an American classic in one of the world's great anti-war books.
I have to be straight with everybody. Mm-hmm. This is a hard one to tackle. And it's not just because I like it so much, but because it's pretty sad. It has levity, but some might describe that levity as dark comedy. There is definitely a love of life throughout it, mm-hmm. but there aren't really any like haunted golf courses, for example.
Right.
But there is an alien zoo, so, it's got that going for it.
I think this is a tragedy with comic moments. I don't even know if I'd call it a dark comedy, but it's readable, man. Like, I had no problem at all rereading it. And I did say it's my first time reading it. I did read the graphic novel version of the book before, which I mentioned when we covered Vonnegut's story Harrison Bergeron a couple of years ago. Study number 68. I'll link out to that graphic novel in the notes, but it's an excellent adaptation. And it includes a foreword Vonnegut wrote later to the book that really impacted me. The Dresden atrocity, tremendously expensive and meticulously planned, was so meaningless finally that only one person on the entire planet got any benefit from it. He's talking about himself. Yeah. He calculates the amount in that foreword that he made personally from everybody who died in the event. So obviously feeling survivor's guilt, but so much more since this book was so successful for him. Mm. I have to admit, I found I was avoiding getting started on notes because this, as you said, is painful territory, the firebombing of Dresden. I know that folks debate back and forth the necessity of such a horrific act. We're probably not going to get into that too much because I think we can all agree that there may be reasons for things that happen in war and that hard choices are made, and we have to look at the times when those choices were made to judge them, etc. But I think we can all agree overall war is bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, I find it interesting that this is described as an anti-war book. If you were to write a pro-war book, I suppose you'd have to lay out some pretty extensive persuasive reasoning. But to write an anti-war book, as far as I can tell, all you have to do is describe war.
Yeah.
Like all of the other classic anti-war books I've read are like The Red Badge of Courage, which is referenced in this novel, or All Quiet on the Western Front. They just give you the message from the ground. They're not telling you what conclusion to draw because it's obvious.
Yeah.
War is terrible for everybody involved, and those involved typically didn't choose it. Mm-hmm. The mechanism of the strange story, the jumping around in time and the space aliens, this helps distance us from the horrible tragedy of Dresden. And I think using Billy Pilgrim as a stand-in likely also helped Vonnegut process the horror of what he went through, since this book is loosely based on his experiences. The first chapter of this book is actually about him and why he wrote it. So let's jump in, and along the way, I think you can help sketch in that bio a little bit more.
Yeah, chapter 1 is really more of a preface than a chapter, I would say. And Vonnegut tells us that a lot of the stuff actually happened. That he did know a guy who was shot by a firing squad over a teapot. He did know a guy who had an enemies list during the war and then planned to have them killed after the war. Mm-hmm. These strange, kooky characters that we're about to meet were real people. but he did change the names. So a little more biography on Vonnegut. The U.S. entered World War II after Pearl Harbor. Vonnegut was in the Reserve Officers Training Corps, but he was kicked out soon after for poor grades, and he wrote a satirical article, which didn't go over well. Instead of waiting to be drafted, he enlisted into the Army. He was trained to fire and maintain howitzers. As part of his training, Vonnegut ended up going to university to get a mechanical engineering degree. But by 1944, all training was canceled for D-Day. He was sent to Camp Atterbury, south of Indianapolis, where he's from. He was allowed to stay at home and use the family car while at basic training there, basically, or the equivalent of. He was trained as a scout while he was there. But during this time, Vonnegut's mother committed suicide.
3 months after that, he was sent to Europe and fought in the Battle of the Bulge. Vonnegut was captured on December 22nd, 1944, along with 50 other American soldiers and taken to a prison camp south of Dresden. During that time, the prison was mistakenly attacked by the U.S. Air Force, and 150 prisoners were killed.
After that, Vonnegut was sent to live in a slaughterhouse where he worked in a factory that made malt syrup for pregnant women. Vonnegut says that the Germans didn't have bomb shelters in Dresden because they didn't think it would be bombed. It was a civilian city with no war industry, just cigarette factories, hospitals, and clarinet factories.
Well, clarinets hadn't been instruments of war since the early 1700s. That's when they added the octave key and they removed the spikes that used to run up and down the whole thing.
Right, yes.
In the Middle Ages, yeah.
On February 13th, 1945, the Allied forces bombed Dresden. 254 planes carried 500 tons of explosives and 375 tons of incendiaries. The explosives were known as blockbusters because they could destroy an entire building or a city block.
The high explosives were intended to rupture water mains and blow off roofs, doors, and windows to expose the interiors of the buildings and create an airflow to feed the fires caused by the incendiaries that followed. I spent some time last night learning more about this. You know, the bombs dropped and wrecked the city. A lot of people came out to see what had happened afterwards, and then the firebombs followed, just incinerating whole families where they stood, creating these gale force winds because the fire was sucking in all of the oxygen, so people were being just lifted off the ground and carried into the burning. It was really hard to research for obvious reasons. It was like really upsetting me.
It's really upsetting stuff.
I had to stop.
Vonnegut, some other prisoners, and some German guards survived by taking refuge in a meat locker 3 stories underground.
Vonnegut said, when we came up, the city was gone. They burnt the whole damn town down.
Vonnegut and the other surviving prisoners were put to work immediately trying to find bodies in the rubble. That didn't last long, and the prisoners were marched on foot, but then abandoned by their captors. Vonnegut and the other prisoners made their way to a prisoner of war camp in France in May of 1945 with the help of the Soviets. And so that was like months after the bombing happened. It took that long for him to get out of these circumstances they were wandering around Europe.
And after that was all done, Vonnegut was awarded a Purple Heart, about which he remarked, I myself was awarded my country's second lowest decoration, a Purple Heart for frostbite, underplaying. So much of the survival is luck, but a lot of it is, too, his own personal fortitude to be able to survive something like that.
Yeah.
Obviously, a little extra humility that's not necessary. He was discharged from the U.S. Army and returned to Indianapolis. I honestly don't know how one doesn't go insane after surviving such a thing.
In this first chapter, in the beginning, Vonnegut talks about going back to Dresden years later and meeting a cabbie there who was just a really nice guy. And they talk for a bit. He finds out the cabbie's wife died in the firebombing in Dresden. He writes the sentence, so it goes. And Vonnegut does this throughout the book when somebody dies. Mm-hmm. And at first I thought this was sort of a numbing or minimalization of death. Since it's so hard to deal with, the phrase kind of helps mitigate the pain. Mm-hmm. But the Tralfamadorians use the phrase quite a bit, and he attributes getting that phrase from them. Because they live in this 4D space, they just see death as only a small slice of a person's existence. So their actual death is pretty trivial to the whole. And I've also read that some people see it as a bit of satire about the normalization of death that governments and armies do. You know, we bomb thousands of people, so it goes.
Death is the only certain thing that humans will go through, and he uses this phrase for war victims. I do think it calls attention to that minimalization that we still hear in the news every day. But he also says it for people who die of disease or accident, so it goes. I recognize this feeling a bit since we, on this show, we don't cover living authors, and so none of our bios ever ends with Clark Ashton Smith is currently running a small spa in Napa.
No.
It's always heart disease or cancer or something worse.
Yeah.
And even this bio that I quoted on my dust jacket of my copy of this a second ago, it ends with what I thought was kind of dark humor. It says, Vonnegut was, as Graham Greene declared, one of the best living American writers. Mr. Vonnegut passed away in April 2007. It's like they're correcting the record. Oh, but he's not living anymore, and should say, so it goes.
Vonnegut says that writing the book wasn't easy, that he could write an account of what happened to him, but that's nothing that the history books wouldn't tell you.
He makes it out as one of those projects he always says he's working on when people ask him, but that he's always putting it off.
When he told the filmmaker Harrison Starr that he was writing a book about Dresden, Starr asked Vonnegut if it was an anti-war book. Yeah, I guess, replied Vonnegut. Why don't you write an anti-glacier book instead?
Well, he makes a good point. A book's not going to persuade humanity to stop doing this.
No.
I think of it as the political comic versus Carlin debate when I think about these things. Political comics, in order for what they talk about to work, they have to believe that there's a better way. You can only really berate the foolish things that leaders are doing if there's an alternative that they're avoiding. Reasonable policy, good diplomacy, etc.
Sure.
Versus George Carlin's view, which was that believing in such things was self-soothing and self-deluding, and that there's really no hope for humanity. We'll be doing the same stupid circular things until we self-destruct entirely. Whether to expend mental energy hoping for something different or just accept the kind of animal limitations of the species is a debate that is happening in my household daily,
Right.
And this book doesn't solve it, but it certainly addresses it.
Vonnegut dedicates the book to that German cab driver in Dresden and this woman, Mary O'Hara. She's the wife of a veteran friend of his, and she didn't like Vonnegut at first. She knew that he was a writer and that he was going to write a book about the war, and she kept her feelings to herself until she couldn't anymore, and then she just let him have it, telling him that she was so angry about how people glorify war and the whole thing. And she says, you were just babies in the war. Mm-hmm. She was afraid that Vonnegut's book was going to be fodder for yet another John Wayne movie. But Vonnegut promised that he wasn't going to let that happen. He says, I'm going to call it the Children's Crusade. And then after that, she liked it.
The graphic novel makes that into a really funny visual joke because there's the scene where he says, I promise you I will call it the Children's Crusade. And then you turn the page and there's the title, Slaughterhouse-Five. Although he does include it in the title, which is like a little story all in and of itself, this title. It says Slaughterhouse-Five, or The Children's Crusade, A Duty Dance with Death by Kurt Vonnegut Jr., a fourth-generation German-American now living in easy circumstances on Cape Cod and smoking too much, who as an American infantry scout hors de combat as a prisoner of war, witnessed the firebombing of Dresden, Germany, the Florence of the Elbe, a long time ago, and survived to tell the tale. This is a novel somewhat in the telegraphic, schizophrenic manner of tales of the planet Tralfamador, where the flying saucers come from. Peace. And that's the title.
Yeah. Vonnegut gives this book to a friend of his to read and says this about it.
It is so short and jumbled and jangled, Sam, because there is nothing intelligent to say about a massacre. Everybody is supposed to be dead, to never say anything or want anything ever again. Everything is supposed to be very quiet after a massacre, and it always is, except for the birds. And what do the birds say? All there is to say about a massacre, things like, poo-tee-weet. I have told my sons that they are not, under any circumstances, to take part in massacres, and that the news of massacres of enemies is not to fill them with satisfaction or glee. I have also told them not to work for companies which make massacre machinery, and to express contempt for people who think we need machinery like that.
Vonnegut talks about reading from a hotel Bible while traveling about the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah and how Lot's wife looked back and was turned into a pillar of salt.
People aren't supposed to look back. I'm certainly not going to do it anymore. I've finished my war book now. The next one I write is going to be fun. This one is a failure, and had to be, since it was written by a pillar of salt. It begins like this. Listen, Billy Pilgrim has come unstuck in time. It ends like this. Poo-tee-weet.
Those things are true, and the start of the next chapter is what we heard at the top, the real beginning of this character, Billy Pilgrim's story. Listen, Billy Pilgrim has come unstuck in time.
We learn that Billy Pilgrim pops through time, unable to control when and where he's going to go.
And the verb that's being used there, unstuck, is actually carries with it a bit of judgment and editorial. He could just say what you said, that Billy Pilgrim pops around or that he travels in time, but he says he's unstuck, meaning that the rest of us are stuck. That perhaps our way of processing time isn't the best way to be doing it.
We get a brief bio on Billy. He was born in Ilium, New York in 1922. He served in World War II in Germany, where he was taken prisoner and eventually honorably discharged. He went to school to become an optometrist. He was engaged to the daughter of the head of the school, but had a nervous breakdown. He was institutionalized, given shock treatments, and recovered. He married that fiance, became rich, had 2 kids, Barbara and Robert. Robert fought in Vietnam.
In 1968, Billy was in a plane crash with his father-in-law and a bunch of other optometrists. He was the only survivor. While recovering, Billy's wife accidentally then died of carbon monoxide poisoning while he was in the hospital. So it goes. After he recovered from the crash, he's being cared for off and on by his young daughter, who's dealing with a lot of responsibility for her age. And during this time, he sneaks off to New York City and appears on a radio show and explains how he has been abducted by aliens in the past.
He told the world that the Tralfamadorians took him and put him in an intergalactic zoo where he was placed with a human female, Montana Wildhack, a movie star. They mated and had a child together.
We've covered Theodore Sturgeon on the show, and it was only after doing that I realized that Vonnegut's writer character, Kilgore Trout, who makes an appearance in this book as well, that Kilgore Trout is a parody of Sturgeon's name, Trout, Sturgeon. So I was wondering if Wildhack was a riff on something, but I couldn't come up with it. And I'm assuming it's Marilyn Monroe or Jane Mansfield. Maybe it's a type like that.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Billy's daughter went and got him in the city and began treating him like he was going senile. In a letter to a local newspaper, Billy said that the Tralfamadorians were green, about 2 feet tall, and shaped like a plunger. The sucker bit was on the ground, and the shaft ended with a green hand with an eye in the palm. They were friendly and could see in 4 dimensions.
And that's the fascinating part, not the plunger shape, but their perception of time.
To them, everything exists at once. They can skip to any moment in time and observe it. They see death just as a condition of a person at that particular moment, but there are lots of other moments where they're fine. When people point out the death part of somebody's life, they just say, so it goes.
I think elsewhere in the book there's a mountain comparison, or maybe I read it somewhere else, but it helps me imagine this. As humans, we can't see the mountains because we're walking the range, but the Tralfamadorians are standing at a distance and they see them all at once. That's the difference of perception. So, yeah, you're looking gross as a corpse, but at the same time, you're graduating college and you look good. In their perception, it's all happening simultaneously.
Billy's daughter is angry about him writing crazy letters to the paper and going to the radio show. She asks him why he never brought this up before the airplane crash, and he says he didn't think it was the right time. So I suppose if you wanted to look at the story in another way, this might give us a view of the story that Billy has had some kind of brain damage in this crash. All of this is just part of a psychosis. But I don't want to. I like it better with aliens.
This is another way in which it's a weird tale. There's a clear case for it all being explainable as mental illness. And it's a nested story. This is an account from Billy, who's an unreliable narrator, inside of a tale by Vonnegut, who is straight up telling us he's an unreliable narrator.
Yes.
I think that this science fiction fourth dimension view of life and death is also very comforting. So like you, I'm just taking it at face value because that comforts me as well. To me, this is all real. The aliens are real.
Yes.
This is documentary.
Billy believes that he first came unstuck during World War II when he was the assistant to an Army chaplain. He was assigned a job to drive the Army chaplain at the Battle of the Bulge, but before he even made it to his chaplain, he got swept up in a battle and he was separated from everyone, but he was found and taken in by 3 American soldiers who tried to make it back to Allied territory. He didn't have a weapon. He only had a thin coat and some clothes. He didn't have boots. He was just wearing his shoes.
Costuming is so important in this book because it presents a very dramatic absurdity that can't be ignored. Everything that reads as dramatic and military is undercut by the way he's dressed. Like everybody in the world, he shouldn't be in this situation, and his getup only continues to get more absurd as the story goes along.
The other guys are 2 scouts and this gunner called Roland Weary. Weary is new to the war, and he is super psyched about being there. He has dreams of being a war hero, killing Nazis. He's kitted out, and he's ready to go.
He and Billy are both outfitted with the gear they brought from home, really, and that's something that's not presented a lot. American GIs were certainly wealthier and better equipped than other forces in the war, but throughout history, soldiers have had to provide for themselves on top of what they're issued, and your family's ability to provide you with extra armor or better weapons may determine whether you live or die.
Billy doesn't really seem to want to be rescued in this moment, often telling the other guys to go on without him, but Weary won't have it. Not in a friendly, caring way, but more about doing his job as a soldier, and he constantly berates Billy, calling him an idiot and worthless. Yet he still tries to protect him. Weary's only 18 at this time. He is an obnoxious person and has been his whole life, and has a chip on his shoulder because he has often been ditched in the past by other people, which hurt his feelings. These two scouts don't really like Weary, even though he thinks of the three of them as the Three Musketeers,
Right.
which is, crazy. He has these stories about them hanging out after the war together and doing things. And he talks actually to Billy more than to them, telling him about weapons and weapons that he has, weapons that he's seen, torture devices, and how they worked in very gory detail.
Of course, I love the character of Weary, the blowhard who is psyched for violence. I feel like I've known this guy my whole life. Loves talking about fights, how he's going to use this move or that move, how somebody's going on the list. And, War of the Worlds, aside from some other odd-looking aliens, presented us with this character as well in the infantryman who had grandiose dreams about what he was going to accomplish in the conflict.
When Billy first got unstuck, he zipped to the time after his death, which is just all violet light, and then before his birth, which is just red light and the sound of water rushing. Mm-hmm. He then went to the time when he was a boy at the YMCA, where his dad threw him into the pool to teach him how to swim, and he just sank like a rock and had to be rescued. He then jumps to 1965, where he's visiting his mother on her deathbed, and she whispers something to him. How did I get so old?
That frame in the graphic novel just shattered me when I read it. How did I get so old?
We get many little scenes from Billy's life, all out of order, but the main part of the story is going to be his time in Germany during the war.
In many ways, we all experience our lives like this, right?
Yeah.
You are in the present moment, but oftentimes if it's not something that's completely occupying you, you will drift away to other moments of your life or to anxiety about a possible future.
Yeah, it totally taps into that. Eventually, Weary and Billy are ditched by the scouts.
Right, because those guys do know what they're doing and they want to survive. And this triggers Weary's trauma of being that eager kid who wanted to hang out with the grown-up guys but keeps getting slapped back. In that way, he's experiencing time that way as well, right? Because his experience in this moment is not just a reaction to the scouts that just ditched him, but to everybody who's ever ditched him.
Yep. Weary is angry, blames Billy for this, and then he begins beating him to death. But before he can, he is stopped by German soldiers who are confused as to why one American is attacking another.
Right, they come across this. And this is where the guys get captured, and that kicks off chapter 3.
The soldiers doing the capturing were sort of dregs, old men and young teenagers. One of the young ones was wearing clogs, and one of the old men tells Weary to give the boy his boots, and Weary has to wear the kid's clogs that don't fit him.
He loses these awesome boots that were provided for him from his family.
They're marched off to a holding area. Billy jumps ahead in time to being an optometrist with a patient. He looks at the wall in his office at a framed quote, and I've heard this quite often. It's by alcoholics say it at AA meetings. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to always tell the difference.
Yeah, the Serenity Prayer. It goes way beyond AA, although, it's used there. But I see it everywhere, and I do think there's a lot of wisdom in it.
Yeah, and it's a hard lesson to learn. Honestly, I'm not even sure if it's true. I think we can only change when we can change. We have no real control over it. Control is an illusion. Everything is just going to play out as it always was. We are just a big chemical reaction just happening. And I know deep down that that's true, that there really is absolutely no control over your life, and your decisions that seem like you're making decisions have already been made and they're just playing out. But I don't behave that way. I behave like I am making choices, and I do take responsibility for those choices.
That makes sense, yeah. But I do think the prayer is true because it asks for the wisdom to know the difference. And you're sorting that out right there as you say those things. What's the difference? Me personally, I fall back on the wisdom of Conan the Barbarian in these situations. If life is an illusion, then I am no less an illusion. And being thus, the illusion is real to me. I live, I burn with life, I love, I slay, and am content. I think that the Serenity Prayer is here in the text to spotlight what you're saying, though. It says that Billy has his this prayer on his wall to keep him going, even though he's unenthusiastic about living. And his patients like it too. But he concludes that section by writing, among the things Billy Pilgrim could not change were the past, the present, and the future. So, then we flash back to the war, and Billy and Weary are being led to prison.
Some German press guys show up and take these mock photos of them being captured, Billy and some of the other soldiers, and then they're carted off to boxcars for transport. Weary's feet are all bloodied from the clogs that don't fit. On the train, Billy runs into this officer. He tells Billy that they're all going to make it through this. He tries to give him a pep talk, and he calls himself Wild Bob. And he says, hey, when this whole war is over, I'm going to have everybody over to my ranch in Wyoming for a barbecue. It's going to be great. Just hold on. You're going to make it, man.
Right. Sympathetic character, but these are more war romanticizers. The German press guys are trying to make the whole capture look more dramatic than it was.
Yep.
And here, this guy's got that romantic afterwards. We're going to laugh about all of this fun that we're having.
Yeah. They're all crammed into boxcars where there is absolutely no room to sit, and they have to take turns lying down. There's no toilet, so they use a helmet and have to dump it out the window.
I think it might even be like a vent they're dumping it out of. I don't know if there's a wind. This part of the book was so hard to read. They're just on this train in the dark, moving so slowly, never knowing when they're going to be let off. Billy's been separated from Weary, who's in another train, blaming him for everything, as we'll find out. But since Billy hops around in time, he must be having wild dreams as he sleeps, and nobody wants to sleep near him. So he's got to sleep leaning in a corner, sort of. He's just outcast and hated by everybody. On top of the claustrophobia and human misery, it lasts for days and days in this dark enclosed space.
A guy in one of the trains, not the train that he's in, dies, and it takes forever for the Germans to actually remove the body, and Billy can see that it's Wild Bob. So it goes.
Meanwhile, there's a hobo who keeps saying, I've been in worse places than this. This is nothing. And of course, later that guy will die as well. So it goes. I was touched by this paragraph near the end of that chapter.
Human beings in there were excreting into steel helmets, which were passed to the people at the ventilators who dumped them. Billy was a dumper. The human beings also passed canteens, which guards would fill with water. When food came in, the human beings were quiet and trusting and beautiful. They shared.
It's a real relief to see some glimpses of kindness in this mess, and at least at the end of this chapter, Billy is able to lie down. Everybody sleeping has a spoon together on the ground, and he's spooning with the hobo, which even out of wartime is no picnic, let me tell you. But in this case, it's better than standing.
As he drifts off to sleep, he goes to 1967 and the Tralfamadorians.
Yes, and we're going to get more details on how he was abducted and the nature of these aliens and the zoo that he's being kept in, which is a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
I want to thank our reader once again, Sean Langenecker.
And I also want to thank some of our patrons. I'm going to start by thanking Matthew Thomas.
I'd like to thank Andrew Watts.
Daniel Nash, thank you.
Deus Moribundus, thank you.
Gavin Wims, thank you.
I'd like to thank Christian Lanke.
Brackus Rex, thank you.
Colin Burns, thank you.
Rick Summers, thanks so much.
And I'd like to thank Abner Elizondo.
And of course, our stakers who make these free shows possible. Thank you so much, Continental Breakfast, Angelina Brown, Bag of Weasels, It's a Ghost, Jay Robinson, Christopher Rosser, Alistair Brooks, John Morgan, Schmeil Khan, Kip Barnes, Richard Wolf, Ben A., and Eric Esvalone, MD.
And lastly, I would like to remind folks to check out Cosmic Horror, the new expansion of Spectre Operations.
It's supernatural horror in miniature, and it's so cool. We're going to link out in the show notes. Please check that out. We'll be back with more Slaughterhouse-Five next week. I guess we'd call it Slaughterhouse-6. Stay tuned for that. These jokes are terrible, and I'm making them. I'm Chad Pfeiffer.
I'm Chris Lackey, and you've been listening to Strange Studies of Strange Stories
at strangestudies.com and Patreon.
Strange Studies of Strange Stories.